Joining us right now from the great state of Florida is Congressman Steube. Congressman, great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks, John. I appreciate having me.
Pretty important news conference yesterday. A lot of people talking about it. You laid out all of the different factors of how Mayorkas has put this country's national security at risk. Tell us why people are getting more and more behind the idea of removing him from office.
Well, I think it's just, you talk about numbers and they change every single day because there's like thousands of people coming across the border every single day. So the numbers are just completely fluid. But you've got over 5 million that have come in since Joe Biden's been president, completely overrunning our border security individuals. You've got records amount of drugs and fentanyl coming across the border for the first time in the history of the country. Those between the age of 18 and 45 is the leading cause of death. Yesterday in the press conference, because we all kind of divided different issues, I talked about the 98 known terrorists who have been apprehended at the border. And when Secretary Mayorkas was before the Judiciary Committee, Republicans asked him directly, and at the time I think it was like 42 known terrorists. Of the known terrorists that you apprehended at the border, have you released them into the country? And he refused to answer that question, which tells you everything that you need to know. And having 98 known terrorists that have been released into our country, I can't think of a higher crime than allowing known terrorists. These are people that maybe just aren't terrorists and we don't know about. These are people that have been identified by our intelligence agencies, by our federal government to be known terrorist suspects, and they have been apprehended at the border, and he refuses to answer the question, which tells me they've also been released into our country. I can't think of a higher crime against our country than releasing known terrorists into our country.
That 98 is more than all the 4 years of the Trump combined of the people trying to cross. We've sent the signal to the bad guys, come across. It's so remarkable. And I think that data that you put out yesterday really captured people's fancy. You have a good sense of your caucus. You're talking to the other members. How much support inside the House Republican caucus is there for starting the process against Mayorkas?
There's certainly 100% support in the Judiciary Committee. Obviously, the committee is going to change with the new members once they get sworn in on January 3rd, and all the committees get kind of shuffled around. But I would think it's overwhelming support within the conference. But we also realize, we're not naive in the fact that you're going to need 60 votes to remove him in the Senate. So what we're going to do is we're going to put all these facts before the American people. And regardless of whether the Senate decides to remove him or not, the American people will actually have the facts. They will have the evidence. They will have the people, the angel moms that will come and testify about how their children have been killed by drug cartels and illegal immigrants who have been able to come into our country. And we're going to lay the case before the American people. Maybe it'll be enough to convince some Democrats. We would need at least, 10 or 11 Democrats to do it, which, again, we're not naive in the fact that he may not be removed in the Senate. But what we're going to do is we're laying the case for a new president in 2024 with the atrocities that have occurred with an open border policy this administration has. People just need to understand every single day, federal law that was passed by Congress is being violated intentionally, deliberately at our southern border every single day. And there has to be some accountability to that.
It's just mind-numbing. When the Twitter files came out over the last 10 days, I was thinking back to a moment you had in 2018 where you had Jack Dorsey on the box at a hearing. You pressed him hard. You look back now at the contemporaneous documents that have been released. Did you get a straight answer from the guy?
No, and I hope, he testified in multiple different committees over the last several years. And in my opinion, he lied to Congress, which is a felony and an offense. And if, the Michael Cohens of the world who work for Trump can get prosecuted for it, then he should too. And again, the great thing about the Republican majority in the House, regardless of what happened in the Senate, is we have subpoena power now, oversight authority now, and the ability to call these people in, put them under oath, and make prosecutorial referrals to the DOJ. These individuals, in my opinion, Jack Dorsey lied to Congress, and we kind of highlighted a bunch of tweets where we mirrored what he said in these different committees with what has now been dumped and we know to be a fact. They knew what was going on. They were 100% censoring individuals, and he lied to Congress, and there needs to be some accountability for that, not just for Republicans who work for Trump, but for anybody that breaks our law in our country.
Yeah, and there's a precedent, as you pointed out, with Michael Cohen and so many others, or if they don't testify, you get the Steve Bannon precedent. So it's going to be interesting to see if this Justice Department will act consistently when those referrals come. When you take a look now, and we were told for the longest time that when the FBI was involved in censorship, it was to stop foreign threats, Russian disinformation. We now see them just literally targeting Americans who have no connection to Russia or Iran or any foreign power. One of them was an Indiana city councilman, I think a Republican city councilman that shows up in these things. The FBI was directly involved in regulating American free speech. Where do they get that legal authority from, or are they operating outside the lines?
They don't have any legal authority to do that. And then there's another example of the power that the Judiciary Committee in the House will have to bring this before the American people and show just how corrupt at the highest levels of our intelligence gathering agencies and the FBI, where they went after specifically conservatives and are now a political action Justice Department. They are not treating January 6th detainees the same way they treated people that invaded the Department of Interior. They're not treating conservatives the same way that they're treating liberals who protested in 2020 and destroyed federal property. And it starts at the FBI, and they have a completely politicized Department of Justice. And thankfully, we're going to be able to bring a lot of that information before the American people.
Yeah, it's going to be an explosive year of revelations and accountability, I think, next year. You served our country in uniform so bravely. You have fought for all those troops that tried to exercise their religious exemption or objection to the vaccine. You got a victory in the NDAA, but there's still a lot of people that you haven't forgotten who either were already coerced to take the vaccine or kicked out. Your thoughts on the next phase of winning the vaccine mandate battle with the Pentagon?
Yeah, the next step is justice for the individuals that have been kicked out, who've gotten a dishonorable discharge, who have had things removed, or those people who didn't have a choice. Their choice was either they retire at 18 or 19 years right before their retirement, or they take the COVID vaccine. All of those people are going to get justice in the next year, either through the appropriations process. I spoke with some of them, former admirals, former leaders in the Coast Guard. We have right now, I think it's 7 or 8 Coast Guard cadets that were kicked out of the Coast Guard for refusing the vaccine. Those people need to be made whole, and if they want to go back into the academy, they absolutely should get the authority and the right to make that decision to go back in and be held harmless from a very divisive, woke military that we have run by Secretary Austin and President Biden. So that's going to be the next step. I intend on filing my own bill. But again, I also am not naive in thinking that bill won't pass a Democratic Senate. But thankfully, the House has the power of the purse. And then through the appropriations process, when we do the appropriations process early next year, we can put riders on those appropriations bills to tell Department of Defense how they're going to give relief to these individuals.
Extraordinary stuff, big stuff. And those men and women in the military had you as a champion. When it wasn't popular to be in that position, you stood up for them. You stood up for the Naval Academy graduates. A remarkable, remarkable effort. And I think now we're beginning to see the light of day. Are you excited about your governor starting a grand jury and getting to the truth of all the things about the vaccine?
Yeah, and I applaud him for doing that. I think more states need to use their rights under the 10th Amendment of our Constitution and the states' rights to be able to shine light on all these type of things that have been going on. I mean, I read the Epic Times on a pretty regular basis, and it's article after article of genuine medical research that's showing the dangers of this vaccine and people being forced in to this vaccine. The military, obviously, we just talked about as one of those examples. So I'm glad that we have states that are going to bring some light and shed some light on that. Obviously, the mainstream media doesn't want to talk about it, but the more that this is affecting everyday Americans and they're seeing it, I mean, it's almost every day you read a news article about a young guy in his 50s or early 60s that just like suddenly collapses and dies. And then there's an Australian case where they did autopsies and they're seeing blood clots from 100% of the people that were vaccinated in their autopsies. That is not a coincidence, and there's now medical research and facts and evidence to back all of this up.
Pretty remarkable moment. Thank God your voice is in there. We're going to be watching you closely all next year. A lot of big things coming. Congressman, I want to thank you for the time today. I want to wish you an early Merry Christmas and look forward to working with you in 2023.
Absolutely. Thank you. Merry Christmas to you as well.
Thank you, sir. All right, folks, don't go anywhere. When we come back, Elaine Parker